Hey there, how you doing today? I just have a short, well, I don't know if it's that short actually, just a devotion on Psalm 127. I was thinking recently about how you grow a church in the days we live in. Things are different than they used to be. Feels like, for me, the ideas that I may have had for growing a church, they seem to come up short a lot of the time. And if you look at your abilities and what you might be good at, it's possible to get discouraged. And in those times, this scripture often comes to mind, Psalm 127, the first two verses. A song of pilgrims for ascending to Jerusalem. So I guess during a festival when they're going up the steps or something, you're supposed to be singing this song. A psalm of Solomon. Unless the Lord builds a house, the work of the builders is wasted. Unless the Lord protects a city, guarding it with sentries will do no good. It's useless for you to work so hard from early morning until late at night, anxiously working for food to eat, for God gives rest to his loved ones. And this psalm, like it says, a psalm of Solomon, and it may have been a psalm that Solomon wrote, or it could have been a psalm that was written for Solomon. And if the latter is true, then that's interesting because it might have been a psalm that David wrote for his son. And we were talking about this in our Bible study last week. It just came up that David wanted to build a temple for God. And God said, no, you can't do it. You're not the one that's going to do it. And he fills in why later on, but he says, your son will do that for me. It's found in 2 Samuel 7. King summoned Nathan and said, look, here I am living in this beautiful cedar palace, but the ark of God is out there in a tent. David said to the king, go ahead and do whatever you want, because God is with you. But that same night the Lord said to Nathan, go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord has declared. Are you the one to build a house for me? And so God says all these things like, first of all, I don't need a house. I didn't ask anybody to build me a house. I don't need you to do that for me. And then he lists off all these things that he's done for David. And then he says this, 2 Samuel 7:11, I will give you rest from all your enemies. Furthermore, the Lord declares, he will make a house for you, a dynasty of kings. For when you die and are buried with your ancestors, I will raise up one of your descendants, your own offspring. I'll make his kingdom strong, and he will be the one to build a house, a temple for my name, and I will secure his royal throne forever. And that was pointed out to me in Bible class one time, and it kind of stuck with me that David says, I want to do something for God. I want to build God a house. And God says, I don't need anything from you, but since you want to do something for me, I'm going to do something for you. I'll build you a house. And it brings to mind the idea, something I like to remind myself of, that you can't outgive God. Familiar phrase. You can't outgive God. And also, I like to think, or I like to say, if you need something, give it away. If you're lacking something, or like, because the more tightly you hold on to something, it seems like the less you have it, you have. But the more generous you are, and the more you give, the more that God gives back to you. And you just can't give more than He's going to give back to you. Or as Ecclesiastes put it, keep on casting your bread upon the water. Soon it will come to you on many waves. Or, as Jesus said, give and it will be given to you. Luke 6:38. Give and you will receive. Your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together to make room for more, running over, poured into your lap. The amount you give will determine the amount you get back. So just a mini lesson there on being generous and how God rewards a generous heart. So later on in his life, David gets Solomon just towards the end of it, really, and he says, okay, you're going to build the house of God. And we find that in 1 Chronicles 22. David is old, telling his son, build a temple. David says, I couldn't build it because I'm a man of war, but you're going to be a man of peace. So make sure you build the Lord's temple. And that brings me back to Psalm 127. Whether Solomon wrote it or David wrote it for Solomon, it's there's instructions in here, not just for the idea of building a temple, but for all areas of our lives. I like the thought that it was some advice from David to Solomon, and I'll read it again. Unless the Lord builds a house, the work of the builders is wasted. Unless the Lord protects the city, guarding it with sentries will do no good. Useless for you to work so hard from early morning until late at night, anxiously working for food to eat, for God gives rest to his loved ones. And if you read it in a different translation, it puts the word vanity in there, or vain. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps watch in vain. It's vain for you to rise early, retire late, to eat the bread of painful labors, for he gives to his beloved. Even in his sleep is what this translation says. Commentators will kind of push back on that and say the better translation is he gives his loved ones rest. But I want to focus on the word vain there because it's used 3 times. It's vain to build unless the Lord's with you. It's vain to watch unless the Lord's with you. And it's vain to work hard unless the Lord's with you. And if you compare that to Ecclesiastes, where you find, this is what it becomes interesting to me. If Solomon wrote the psalm, or if David wrote it to Solomon, and if Solomon is the teacher, the writer of Ecclesiastes, then there's a contrast here, or a comparison, because Ecclesiastes 1:1-3 says, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. A lot of people speculate that's probably Solomon. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What advantage does man have in all his work which he does under the sun? And later down in the chapter, verse 12, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of man to be afflicted with. I have seen all the works that have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity. It's a chasing after the wind. You can't catch it. It's a waste of your time. And so we see the similarity and the contrast here between Ecclesiastes and Psalm 127. They both agree that it's wasted effort to do something without God, because the conclusion of the matter in the end of Ecclesiastes is to fear God and to go ahead and do all what he's given you to do it unto the Lord. And the subplot here could be, if David wrote the Psalm 127, remember the advice of your dad. Remember that you need to have the Lord in your work. You might have human energy and expertise to build a house, and you might have the skill and the alertness to guard a city. But if you think you can do those things apart from God's power and blessing, you're destined for ultimate disappointment and failure. It's vanity. That's what he's saying in Ecclesiastes, chasing after the wind. I did all these things. I pursued pleasure. I pursued wisdom. I pursued learning. I pursued working hard. I tried to build things. And he came back to Psalm 127. Unless the Lord builds the house, it's vain. It's a waste of time. It's not fulfilling and satisfying. I didn't get any meaning out of that. It's meaningless. 3 times the word vanity or useless or meaningless is used in Psalm 127, and 3 quick lessons we can glean from it. Just quick lessons. First is a lesson about divine sovereignty. God is sovereign. And unless he's building the house, builders are laboring in vain. Unless he's watching the city, it's vain to stay awake and try to watch it. If you achieve a measure of apparent excess with your own power and your own gumption, in the end, it's empty. It doesn't satisfy. We keep on hungering for more. And what most people don't realize is the lyrics of a couple of songs that I like, that if there's anything good that happens in life, it's from Jesus. Even, I just believe this. God blesses, the verse says that he lets the rain fall on the righteous and the unrighteous alike. God's looking after everybody, whether they love him or not. And he's kind and he's good to everybody, whether they love him or not. And we don't realize that all the good things we have are because God allows it to happen. And another song says, every good and perfect gift comes from the Father of lights. Same principle as 1 Corinthians 4:7. What do you have that you did not receive? And if you then received it, why do you boast as if you didn't receive it? Or Deuteronomy 8:18. Remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth. Proverbs 21:31. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. Proverbs 16:33. The lot is cast into the lap, but every decision is from the Lord. Ephesians 1:11. Because we're united with Christ, we have received an inheritance from God, for he chose us in advance, and he makes everything work out according to his plan. Matthew 10:29. What is the price of 2 sparrows? 1 copper coin? But not a single sparrow can fall to the ground without your Father knowing it. And the very hairs on your head are all numbered. God knows all about everything, and God is in control. And every good thing that comes to us comes through him. God gives and God takes away is another song, right? When we bless your name. You give and you take away, but I bless your name. When the sun shines, I bless your name. When the rain falls, I bless your name. Everything comes from you. But a second lesson here. So God is sovereign. But secondly, we still have a role to play. We notice that the psalm doesn't say, so why bother? Unless the Lord builds the city, you labor in vain. So don't bother. Let God build the city. And don't bother watching. Just let God do the watching. Because what the psalm points out is God builds the city through the builders, and God watches the city, or builds the house through the builders, and God watches the city through the watchers. And God rewards the work of those who labor under his guidance and care. And this is what we see in creation, what the original intent. God made everything, and then he said this, Genesis 2:15, the Lord placed the man in the Garden of Eden to tend and watch over it. So God wants us to have satisfaction in a good day's work, or being able to do things and be rewarded. There's a lot of disgruntled people, and because there's a lot of imbalance in the world, and so sometimes that gets discouraging, but it's still satisfying to work an honest day and get an honest wage. That still feels good, and it's a godly thing. Psalm 127 recognizes that God works in human affairs through people. And that's an answer for, a lot of people are like, well, why did God allow this or God allow that? Well, it's not really what happened. People did this and that. The world's a mess because people are evil and selfish and nasty to one another. And people didn't do, like, maybe somebody hoarding all the wealth, and God had meant that to be shared. People are people are the ones who mess up the world. Can't blame it all on God. Sometimes we become discouraged and wonder, what can I do to change anything or to build the Lord's kingdom? And the true answer is nothing. Apart from him, we can do nothing. But when God says you can do it, and when God's in it, then, as Jesus said many times in the New Testament, all things are possible. All things are possible. It takes a little faith. Matthew 17:20 is just one example. There's lots in the Bible. He said to them, because they couldn't cast out a demon, I think is what the story was. And then Jesus did. And they're like, why couldn't we do that? And he says, because of the littleness of your faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. And nothing will be impossible to you. And Paul says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I've learned the secret of being hungry, and I've learned the secret of being well fed. I've learned the secret of being clothed and not, and poverty, and all these situations I've learned I can do it through Christ who gives me strength. But in the next chapter of Luke 18, Jesus says, however, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? And maybe that's an answer. Maybe that's something to think about. Like if I'm thinking, well, how do you build the church these days? And because I'm not trying to make this a negative talk at all. The Lord's in it, and the Lord builds it, and it's possible. But maybe there needs to be more faith. Maybe there needs to be more trying, taking chances on or this or that, because all things are possible through the Lord. And when the Lord's with you, and he's giving you an idea, and you go for it, and you have faith that you can do it, then it can be done. But maybe a lack of faith holds us back in the world today. But we have a part to play. God is sovereign. We have a part to play in the building, the watching, the working. And finally, just a lesson about anxiety. Because when you believe God is in control, and you believe you can do all things through Christ who gives you strength, then you can rest in what verse 2 says. God gives rest to his loved ones. It's useless to work hard from early until late, anxiously working for food to eat, because God gives rest to his loved ones. And Jesus said, pray to the Father that he may provide your daily bread. What do you need today? Ask God for that. And as long as you're willing to do, a little bit of work for it, just not stressed out and anxious, but just do what you can, and God will give you what you need. Do what you can, and God will give you what you need. Somebody must have said that. That can sum up what this verse is saying. God's sovereignty doesn't release us from responsibility, but it does free us from anxiety, worry. It frees us from work that he didn't give us to do. And Jesus said, come to me if you're weary and heavy laden, because my burden's light. I never meant for you to be stressed out, working really hard. I'll take care of you. You can trust me. Have some faith. I know all about you. I know every hair on your head. And I just want you to have a reasonable amount of work and not to worry about life. Philippians 4:6 is familiar. Don't be anxious about anything. Don't be anxious about anything. But in everything, by prayer, supplication, with thanks, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. It doesn't make sense, but it'll guard your heart and your mind in Jesus. 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your care upon him, for he cares for you. And I'm taking this lesson to heart myself, because I'm in a bit of a transition here. I've been trying to get away from night work, and I haven't been completely successful. And I'm not making as much as I would like with the day jobs. I've got 3 jobs right now. And last month was a little stressful because learning new things and new schedules, and stuff doesn't always go as planned. And you get to a restaurant and you feel like the people don't want you there, and it's a little bit stressful. But this psalm is helping me to have peace. God will give me what I need, and I don't need to stress about it. Don't take on the burden of work God never gave you to do in the first place. And so we can rest in the promise that God gives rest to his loved ones, and God supplies our every need in Jesus, and God delights in his children, and he gives them good gifts. Can trust in that. We just need to do the best that we can with what he's given us to do and leave the rest in his hands. And if you depend on his strength, rest in his grace, then at the end of the day, you don't need to feel like it was a waste. You can just feel like that was a good day's work, and God's going to give me, because even if you feel like sometimes you're not appreciated, right? Like, it might be hard to find a good paying job for some people these days, and you work hard and you feel like you're not appreciated. You're not getting remunerated for the hard work you put in. But here's God saying, I see and I know and I reward. I give rest to my loved ones, and you can have peace in me. God bless you. Have a good day.